The Mojave Desert stretches endlessly under the scorching sun, where most people see only death and desolation. But Sarah Chen sees patterns others miss, rusted metal fragments emerging from the sand in perfect geometric lines, leading deeper into the wasteland than any rational person would follow. She adjusts the torn baseball cap shielding her face, squinting at the peculiar arrangement of corroded pipes jutting from the hard pan. 3 years living rough have taught her to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming that this isn't natural erosion or some abandoned mining operation. The spacing is too precise, the angles too deliberate. Someone engineered this. Sarah's bare feet, toughened by months of walking on scorching asphalt and broken glass, step carefully around the metal protrusions. Each pipe bears the same weathered markings, stenciled numbers that mean nothing to most people but trigger something deep in her fractured memory. Her fingers trace the faded digits, 7 Alpha Delta -9. The designation sends electricity through her nervous system, though she can't remember why. Following the pipe trail means leaving behind the relative safety of the highway, where truckers occasionally toss water bottles to the desperate. Out here, death comes quickly and quietly, but Sarah's legs carry her forward anyway, driven by a compulsion she doesn't understand. The sun reaches its merciless peak as she walks, and the pipes begin descending underground, their tips barely visible above the shifting sand. She should turn back, should return to the overpass, where she's built a small shelter from shopping carts and tarps. Instead, she finds herself digging with her hands, following the metal trail deeper. Her fingernails, already cracked and blackened, begin to bleed as she claws at the hard pan. But underneath the surface layer, the earth becomes softer, as if it's been disturbed before. Recently, the first pipe leads to a second, then a third, forming a network that speaks to the engineer Sarah doesn't remember being. The mathematical precision awakens neural pathways she thought the streets had destroyed forever. Without conscious thought, her mind begins calculating load distributions and pressure coefficients. Then her fingers strike something solid that isn't pipe. She brushes away sand and grit to reveal a metal hatch, its surface scarred by years of desert storms, but still intact. A keypad beside the handle blinks red in the harsh sunlight. Sarah stares at the numbers, and her right hand moves without permission, fingers dancing across the keys in a sequence that feels like muscle memory. 3 to 1 4 to 1 5 to 9 2 to 6. The light turns green. The hatch releases with a pneumatic hiss that shouldn't be possible in equipment this old. Cool air rushes up from below, carrying the sterile scent of recycled atmosphere and something else, ozone, like the aftermath of an electrical storm. Sarah peers into the darkness below and sees metal rungs disappearing into shadows. Every survival instinct she's developed screams against descending into an unknown underground space. But those same instincts also recognize that whatever lies below has been waiting for her specifically. She swings her legs over the edge and begins to climb down. The shaft extends deeper than she expected, and by the time her feet touch solid ground, the desert opening above appears as a distant circle of light. Motion sensors activate as she moves forward, illuminating a corridor carved from living rock and lined with more of those numbered pipes. The walls are covered with warnings in multiple languages, radiation symbols, and biohazard markers that should terrify her. Instead, she reads them with professional detachment, automatically categorizing threat levels and containment protocols. Knowledge surfaces unbidden. This is a Level 4 biocontainment facility designed to house materials too dangerous for surface storage. But it's more than that. As Sarah walks deeper into the complex, she passes laboratories with equipment she recognizes but can't name, containment units built to specifications she somehow knows by heart, and security systems that read her biometric signatures without requiring any input from her. The facility recognizes her, has been waiting for her. At the complex's heart, she finds a massive chamber dominated by a single reinforced door. Even in the emergency lighting, she can make out the engraved nameplate, Dr. Sarah Chen, Project Director. Her breath catches, not just her name, but her title, her life, carved in metal and waiting in the dark. Behind her, footsteps echo in the corridor she just traversed. Multiple people, moving with military precision. Sarah spins around, but the shadows reveal nothing except the certainty that she's no longer alone down here. Someone has been watching, waiting for her to find this place. The question that burns through her mind isn't just about her forgotten past anymore. It's about why someone went to extraordinary lengths to make her forget it in the first place, and what they're willing to do to keep her from remembering now. The rusted pipe stretched ahead like a metallic serpent frozen mid-strike, disappearing into a ravine where scraggly Joshua trees cast twisted shadows. Maya had been following it for 3 hours now, her worn hiking boots crunching against the hard-pan desert floor. The morning sun climbed higher, already promising another scorching day, but something pulled her forward with magnetic insistence. She paused to drink from her nearly empty water bottle, rationing the precious liquid. 3 days ago, she'd been camped near the outskirts of Tonopah when the pipe first caught her attention, an anomaly jutting from an eroded hillside after the recent flash floods. Most people would have dismissed it as old mining equipment or forgotten ranch infrastructure, but Maya felt something else entirely when she touched the corroded metal, a jolt of recognition so profound it left her gasping. Now, deeper in the wilderness than she'd ventured in months, that same recognition thrummed through her bones. The pipe was definitely man-made, roughly 3 feet in diameter, constructed from some alloy that had weathered decades of desert abuse. Occasional junction boxes appeared at irregular intervals, their metal housings cracked and filled with sand. Whatever this system had once carried, it had been built to last. Maya knelt beside the latest junction box, brushing away accumulated debris. Beneath the grime, she could make out a series of numbers, 7,429B. Below that, partially obscured by rust, were letters that made her pulse quicken, prop, depth of. The rest was illegible, eaten away by time and elements. Property of the Department of... what? She stood, scanning the horizon. Nothing but endless desert stretched in every direction, broken only by distant mountain ranges shimmering in the heat. Yet the pipe continued forward with mechanical precision, following elevation contours as if surveyed by engineers who knew exactly where they were going. A flash of movement caught her eye. Maya froze, one hand instinctively moving to the knife at her belt. 50 yards behind her, a figure had appeared on the ridge she'd descended an hour earlier. Even at this distance, she could tell they were watching her. Maya forced herself to appear casual as she resumed walking, but every nerve was now on high alert. In her months of desert wandering, she'd encountered the occasional hiker or prospector, but never anyone who seemed to be tracking her movements. She risked another glance back. The figure was closer now, definitely following the same path she'd taken. The pipe began to curve southward, leading her toward a cluster of low hills dotted with dark volcanic rock. Maya quickened her pace, using the terrain's natural undulations to periodically break line of sight with her pursuer. When she crested the next rise, her breath caught in her throat. Below lay a shallow valley that shouldn't exist. Her mental map of this region, accumulated through countless nights of studying salvaged atlases and geological surveys, showed nothing but continuous desert floor. Yet here was a natural depression, almost perfectly circular, as if the earth had been scooped away by some massive hand. More striking still was what filled the valley. Concrete structures emerged from drifted sand like the bones of some prehistoric beast. Maya could make out the geometric lines of buildings, a water tower tilted at a precarious angle, and what appeared to be a chain-link fence partially buried under decades of accumulated debris. The pipe led straight toward the center of the complex, disappearing into a concrete bunker whose entrance yawned black and inviting. Maya's head began to pound. Images flashed behind her eyes, fragments of memory so brief and disjointed they felt like someone else's dreams. A woman in a white lab coat, her face obscured by shadows, the sound of heavy machinery echoing through underground corridors, a child's voice, frightened and calling for someone whose name Maya couldn't quite grasp. She staggered, pressing her palm against her temple as the visions intensified. There was something about this place, something that resonated in the deepest corners of her mind, where her earliest memories should be. But those memories had been stolen from her, by trauma, by time, or by something else entirely. A pebble clattered down the slope behind her. Maya spun around to see her pursuer now only 30 yards away, close enough for her to make out details. Male, middle-aged, wearing tactical clothing and military-style boots. He carried himself with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence, and when their eyes met across the desert scrub, he didn't bother to pretend he wasn't following her. Maya ran. She plunged down the hillside toward the buried facility, the pipe now her guide rope into whatever lay hidden in that concrete tomb. Behind her, she heard the man's pursuit, boots striking stone, the whisper of fabric against brush. He wasn't trying to catch her yet, she realized. He was herding her forward, driving her toward the very place she already wanted to go, which meant either he was remarkably stupid or this was exactly what he wanted. The rusted metal door groaned against its hinges as Maya pushed it open wider, her flashlight beam dancing across the threshold. The air that escaped carried the scent of decades-old dust and something else, something chemical and sterile that made her nostrils burn. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the darkness beyond. The corridor stretched ahead of her, lined with concrete walls that sweated moisture despite the desert heat above. Emergency lighting fixtures hung dark and useless from the ceiling, their glass covers cracked or missing entirely. Maya's footsteps echoed with a hollow sound that seemed to travel much farther than the narrow space should have allowed. 20 feet in, she encountered the first door. It stood slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of what looked like an office space. Maya pushed it open and swept her light across overturned chairs and filing cabinets with their drawers yanked open, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Someone had searched this place thoroughly and recently. The dust patterns told her that much. She knelt and picked up one of the papers. The government seal was clear enough, but most of the text had been redacted with thick black bars. What remained visible made little sense. Fragments of sentences mentioning neural pathway reconstruction and memory implantation protocols. At the bottom, a signature, Dr. Elena Vasquez, Project Director. The name hit her like a physical blow. Maya staggered backward, the paper fluttering from her suddenly nerveless fingers. She knew that name. Not from where or when, but she knew it with the same inexplicable certainty that had led her to follow the pipes. Her head began to throb, that familiar pressure building behind her temples. Images flashed unbidden across her vision. A woman in a white lab coat, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a voice saying her name. Not Maya, but something else, something that felt more real than the identity she'd carried for the past 5 years. Fighting through the pain, she forced herself deeper into the facility. The main corridor branched into smaller passages, creating a maze of interconnected rooms. Most were empty, stripped clean except for the occasional piece of forgotten equipment. But in one room, she found something that made her blood run cold. Hospital beds, a dozen of them, arranged in neat rows, each equipped with restraints at the wrists and ankles. Above each bed hung a complex apparatus of wires and sensors, all leading to a central control station that dominated one wall. The equipment looked sophisticated, decades ahead of anything she'd seen in the medical facilities where she'd sometimes sought treatment during her worst periods on the streets. Maya approached the control station, her light revealing banks of monitors and control panels labeled with terms she didn't understand: synaptic modulation, memory reconstruction, personality integration. But one label made her hands shake as she read it: subject termination protocols. A sound from deeper in the facility made her freeze. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, growing closer. Maya killed her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain whoever was coming would hear it. The footsteps paused just outside the room. "I know you're here," a voice called softly, male, calm, with just a hint of accent she couldn't place. "There's no need to hide. I've been waiting for you to come home." Home. The word sent another spike of pain through her skull. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the flood of half-formed memories that threatened to overwhelm her. A laboratory, needles, the sensation of falling through darkness while voices discussed her fate in clinical terms. "You were always the curious one," the voice continued, closer now. "Dr. Vasquez said it would be your defining trait, even after the modifications. She was right, wasn't she? You couldn't stay away." Maya's hand found the knife in her pocket, a rusty blade she'd carried for protection during her years on the streets. It felt inadequate against whatever was happening here, but it was all she had. "The others never made it this far," the voice said, and now she could see the faint glow of a light in the corridor. They accepted their new lives, their implanted memories. But not you. You kept digging, kept questioning. That's why they want you back. The light grew brighter. Maya realized she was trapped in the room with no other exit. She could try to rush past whoever was out there, but the narrow corridor would work against her. Instead, she gripped her knife tighter and called out, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "Who are you? What is this place?" A low chuckle echoed through the darkness. "This place? This is where you were born, Maya. Or should I say, where the real you died and Maya was created to take her place. Welcome back to Project Tabula Rasa." The footsteps resumed, and Maya pressed herself deeper into the shadows, knowing that whatever answers awaited her would come at a price she might not be willing to pay. The metallic tang in her mouth grew stronger as Sarah descended deeper into the facility. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly amber, creating shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The pipe she'd followed outside had led her to what appeared to be a maintenance shaft, but the construction was far too sophisticated for simple utilities. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished concrete floor as she moved through corridors lined with reinforced glass panels. Behind some of the panels, she glimpsed rooms filled with equipment she couldn't identify. Banks of computers from an era she couldn't place, their screens dark and lifeless. The air recycling system hummed constantly, a low frequency that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Sarah paused at an intersection where 3 corridors branched off in different directions. Signs mounted on the walls displayed cryptic designations: Sector 7, Alpha, Biocontainment Level 2, Subject Housing 15 to 30. The words meant nothing to her, yet something about them felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream clawing its way to the surface of her consciousness. She chose the corridor marked Subject Housing without understanding why. The hallway stretched longer than the others, with doors spaced at regular intervals along both sides. Each door bore a small window at eye level and a numerical designation. Sarah approached the first door, room 15, and peered through the thick glass. Inside was a small chamber containing nothing but a narrow bed, a sink, and what appeared to be some kind of monitoring equipment mounted near the ceiling. The walls were pristine white, unmarked by any personal belongings or decoration. It looked less like a bedroom than a cell. Room 16 was identical, as was room 17. Sarah's pulse quickened as she moved down the corridor, checking each room. They were all the same, sterile, minimal, designed for containment rather than comfort. At room 23, she stopped abruptly. The door stood slightly ajar, unusual given that all the others had been sealed shut. She pushed it open carefully, wincing as the hinges creaked in the silence. This room was different. While it contained the same basic furnishings as the others, personal items were scattered across the small space. A faded photograph sat on the nightstand, a family portrait showing a man, woman, and young girl standing in front of a suburban home. Clothes hung in the small closet, and books were stacked on a shelf near the bed. Sarah stepped inside, drawn by an overwhelming sense of recognition. She picked up the photograph, studying the faces. The little girl had dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to stare directly back at her. The woman beside the child shared those same eyes, the same determined set to her jaw, the same face Sarah saw when she looked in mirrors. Her hands began to shake as fragments of memory crashed over her like breaking waves. A woman's voice calling her name, not Sarah, but something else, something that started with an M. The smell of chocolate chip cookies baking in a kitchen filled with afternoon sunlight. A man in a white coat explaining something important while she sat in a chair that was too big for her small body. Subject 23 shows remarkable adaptation to the neural interface protocols. The memory hit her with startling clarity, accompanied by the sound of voices discussing her as if she weren't in the room. She'd been young, maybe 8 or 9, and they'd been running tests, lots of tests. The man in the white coat had kind eyes but spoke about her like she was an experiment rather than a person. Sarah sank onto the narrow bed, overwhelmed by the flood of returning memories. This had been her room. For how long she couldn't remember, but she'd lived here, eaten here, slept here while doctors and scientists studied her brain, mapping neural pathways and testing her responses to stimuli she couldn't comprehend. But why couldn't she remember how she'd gotten here? Or more importantly, how she'd left? A sound from the corridor made her freeze, footsteps, measured and deliberate, moving in her direction. Sarah quickly replaced the photograph and moved to the door, pressing herself against the wall beside the frame. Through the narrow gap, she watched as a figure in dark clothing passed by, carrying what appeared to be some kind of scanning device. Whoever it was, they were definitely searching for something, or someone. Sarah waited until the footsteps faded before slipping back into the corridor. She needed answers, but she also needed to avoid whoever else was exploring this facility. Moving as quietly as possible, she headed in the opposite direction, toward a section marked Administrative Archives. If this place had been her home, then somewhere in those files would be records explaining why. And perhaps more importantly, the records might explain why someone had been willing to kill Marcus Chen to keep this facility's secrets buried. As she moved deeper into the complex, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just uncovering her past. She was walking directly into a trap that had been waiting 15 years for her return. The metal door groaned as Sarah pushed it open, revealing a corridor that stretched into darkness beyond her flashlight's reach. The air that rushed out carried the scent of old electronics and something else, something organic and unsettling. She stepped inside, her boots echoing against concrete floors that had been pristine once before decades of abandonment had claimed them. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically along the walls, casting intermittent red shadows that made her progress feel like a descent into hell. The pipes she'd followed from the desert continued here, branching into a complex network that disappeared into the ceiling and walls. Whatever this place had been, it had required substantial infrastructure. Her flashlight beam caught something glinting ahead, a security checkpoint, complete with turnstiles and what looked like scanning equipment. The technology appeared decades ahead of anything she'd seen, even accounting for the facility's apparent age. She ran her fingers over smooth surfaces that still hummed with residual power, wondering how anything could still function after so long. As she moved deeper into the facility, rooms began appearing on either side of the main corridor. Through reinforced glass windows, she glimpsed laboratories filled with equipment she couldn't identify. In one, cylindrical tanks lined the walls, their contents long since drained, leaving only mineral stains and her imagination to fill in the gaps. In another, banks of monitors displayed scrolling data in languages she didn't recognize, or rather, languages she almost recognized, as if the knowledge lurked just beyond her conscious grasp. The headache that had been building since she entered the desert intensified. With each step, fragments of images flashed through her mind: sterile corridors, people in white coats, the sound of machinery humming day and night, and underneath it all, a persistent sense of dread, as if something terrible had happened here. She paused at an intersection, consulting the hand-drawn map she'd found in the drifter's belongings. The facility was larger than she'd expected, extending deep underground with multiple levels. According to the crude sketches, she was looking for something marked as Archive Level 7. The drifter's notes suggested that's where the answers lay. The elevator bank ahead showed signs of recent use. Fresh footprints in the dust, and one of the call buttons glowed faintly. Someone else had been here, and recently. Sarah's grip tightened on the knife she'd taken from the dead man in the desert. She'd hoped to avoid whatever confrontation was clearly coming, but the deeper she went, the more inevitable it seemed. The elevator descended smoothly, its movement silent despite its apparent age. Numbers counted downward on a display, sub-level 3, 4, 5. When it finally stopped at 7, the doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with what could only be called cells, not prison cells, but something clinical, medical. Each had a small window and a designation number etched into the metal frame. She approached the first cell and peered through the window. Empty now, but the restraint systems were still visible. Bed, monitoring equipment, and something that looked disturbingly like surgical apparatus. The nameplate beside the door read Subject 23A in neat block letters. Moving from cell to cell, she found similar setups, Subject 47B, Subject 12C. The numbers seemed random until she noticed a pattern. They were grouped by letter designation, as if organized into different experimental categories. Her stomach turned as she realized what she was looking at. This had been a human experimentation facility. At the end of the corridor, a door marked Archive stood slightly ajar. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls, and a desk held scattered papers that someone had been examining recently. She approached cautiously, scanning the documents, medical records, psychological evaluations, and photographs, lots of photographs of people who looked lost, desperate, forgotten. One photograph made her breath catch. A young woman, maybe 25, with Sarah's eyes and Sarah's bone structure. The name beneath read, Subject 89D, Memory Integration Trial 7. The date was 32 years ago. Her hands trembled as she picked up the photo. The woman's expression was vacant, drugged, but the resemblance was undeniable. Sarah fumbled through more files, finding documentation of experiments involving memory suppression, identity reconstruction, and something called deep conditioning protocols. The pieces began falling into place, her fragmented memories, her inability to recall anything before her life on the streets began 15 years ago, the way certain places and sounds triggered inexplicable emotional responses. She wasn't investigating this facility's secrets, she was one of them. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind her, slow, deliberate, confident. Someone who knew exactly where they were and had been expecting her arrival. Sarah grabbed as many files as she could carry and looked for another way out of the room. A voice called from the hallway, professional and calm. "Sarah, there's no point in running. We've been waiting for you to come home." The word home hit her like a physical blow, triggering a flood of suppressed memories that sent her to her knees as the footsteps grew closer. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Maya pressed deeper into the facility's bowels. Her footsteps echoed off metal grating, each sound seeming to multiply in the darkness ahead. The air grew thicker with each level she descended, carrying traces of ozone and something else, something organic that made her stomach clench. She'd been walking for 20 minutes when she found the first body. The skeleton lay crumpled against a blast door, still wearing the tattered remains of a white lab coat. A plastic ID badge hung from a lanyard around the neck bones. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Neurological Research Division. The date on the badge showed it had been issued 15 years ago. Maya knelt beside the remains, her hands surprisingly steady. No obvious trauma to the bones, no bullet holes in the skull. Whatever had killed Dr. Vasquez, it hadn't been violent, at least not visibly. The blast door behind the skeleton stood slightly ajar, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Maya aimed her flashlight into the gap and saw another corridor stretching beyond, this one lined with what looked like observation windows. She squeezed through the opening and immediately wished she hadn't. The corridor was a gallery of horrors. Through the reinforced glass windows, she could see into a series of cells. No, not cells, she realized with growing dread. Medical suites. Each one contained a hospital bed surrounded by monitoring equipment, 4 stands, and machines she couldn't identify. And in several of the beds, she could make out the shapes of more skeletons, still strapped down with leather restraints. "What the hell were they doing here?" Maya whispered, her voice cracking. She moved from window to window, documenting the nightmare with her eyes. Room after room of the same setup. Some beds empty, others occupied by the remains of what had once been human beings, men, women, and in one room that made her stomach lurch, what appeared to be children. At the end of the corridor, she found an office with the door hanging open. The nameplate read Dr. James Cortland, Project Director. Maya stepped inside and immediately spotted the filing cabinets, most of them standing open with papers scattered across the floor. She gathered up what documents she could find, squinting at them in the red emergency lighting. Most were heavily redacted, black bars covering crucial information, but she could make out fragments: neural pathway reconstruction, memory engram transfer, subject 47 showing promising results. One document made her blood freeze. It was a transfer order dated 16 years ago, authorizing the movement of Subject 23 from a psychiatric facility in Las Vegas to this location for voluntary participation in experimental therapy. The subject's name was partially visible beneath a strip of white correction tape. Maya. Her hands began to shake. She tried to peel back the tape, but it had been there too long and came away in tiny fragments. Maya something. It could be coincidence. Maya wasn't an uncommon name, but even as she told herself this, she knew she was lying. A sound from somewhere deeper in the facility made her freeze, a rhythmic thumping, like machinery starting up. The emergency lights flickered, and for a moment she thought the main power might be returning. Instead, she heard something else. Footsteps, heavy boots on metal flooring, moving with purpose. Multiple sets of them, getting closer. Maya stuffed the documents into her jacket and looked around frantically for another exit. The office had only one door, the one she'd entered through. She was trapped. The footsteps were in the corridor now, accompanied by the sweep of powerful flashlights. Through the office window, she saw the beams dancing across the observation windows of the medical suites. "Search every room," a voice commanded. Male, authoritative, military. If she made it this far down, she's seen too much. Maya pressed herself against the wall beside the door, trying to control her breathing. They were talking about her, which meant they'd been tracking her somehow, following her progress through the facility. "Sir, we've got fresh disturbance in the documents. She was definitely here. Then she can't be far. Fan out. Check the auxiliary corridors." Maya waited until the footsteps moved away, then crept to the doorway. The corridor appeared empty, but she could see flashlight beams moving in the distance. She had maybe minutes before they circled back. She slipped out of the office and moved in the opposite direction from the search team, looking for stairs or an elevator or any way to get to a different level. The documents in her jacket felt like they were burning against her chest. Whatever answers they contained about her past, she wouldn't live to learn them if she didn't find a way out. At the end of the corridor, she found what she was looking for, a maintenance shaft with an access ladder. She pried open the cover and squeezed inside just as she heard the search team returning. As she climbed toward what she hoped was freedom, one thought echoed in her mind. Subject 23. Maya something. She had the terrible feeling she was about to discover exactly who that someone was. The facility's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows as Maya descended deeper into the complex. The pipe system she'd followed from the desert had led her through maintenance tunnels and into what appeared to be a vast underground research installation. Each step forward felt like diving deeper into her own subconscious, fragments of memory flickering at the edges of her awareness like heat lightning. She paused at a junction where 3 corridors met, studying the faded signage on the walls. Residential Wing C, Hydroponics Bay, Medical Research Division. The words meant nothing to her logically, but something in her chest tightened with recognition. Her fingers traced the raised letters of the medical division sign, and suddenly she was moving toward it without conscious decision. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with doors bearing numbered plaques and small observation windows. Maya peered through the first window into a room containing what looked like a hospital bed surrounded by monitoring equipment. The next room was identical, and the next. A chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature crept up her spine. At room 17 she stopped. Her hand was already reaching for the door handle before she understood why. The metal was cold beneath her palm as she turned it, surprised when the door opened easily. Inside, the bed was made with military precision, white sheets pulled tight over the thin mattress. But it was the object on the small table beside the bed that made her breath catch. A wooden horse, carved from dark wood, no bigger than her palm, with a flowing mane and tail. Maya picked it up with trembling fingers, and the world shifted around her like a kaleidoscope finding focus. "It's beautiful, Maya. Did you make this in woodshop?" "Yes, Dr. Chen. It's for my sister." "You don't have a sister, Maya. Remember?" "We've talked about this." The memory hit her with physical force, driving her to her knees beside the narrow bed. Dr. Chen, round face, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, always patient even when Maya became confused or angry. And there had been anger, so much of it, burning inside her like acid. More memories cascaded through her mind. The daily injections that left her nauseous and disoriented, the tests, cognitive assessments, physical challenges, hours strapped to machines that hummed and clicked while recording every biological function, and the other subjects. God, there had been others. Maya clutched the wooden horse and forced herself to stand. She had to keep moving, had to find answers before whoever was hunting her tracked her down here. Because they would come. She was certain of it now. Whatever had happened in this place, whatever she had been part of, someone was desperate to keep it buried. The next corridor led to what the signs indicated was the administrative wing. Most of the office doors were locked, but she found one slightly ajar and slipped inside. Moonlight filtered through a high window, illuminating a desk covered in scattered papers and file folders. Maya switched on a small desk lamp, praying the facility still had some power reserves. The files were mostly mundane: supply requisitions, personnel schedules, maintenance reports. But buried beneath a stack of invoices, she found a folder marked Project Lazarus, Phase 3 subjects. Her hands shook as she opened it. Photographs spilled across the desk, dozens of them, showing men and women of various ages, all wearing the same grey institutional clothing. Maya recognized some of the faces, shadowy figures from dreams she'd thought were nightmares, and there, third row from the top, was her own face staring back at her. Younger, with fuller cheeks and eyes that held none of the wariness she'd learned living on the streets. Beneath the photo was a label, Subject 23M, Maya Chen Volkov, age 19, Genetic Enhancement Protocol. The name hit her like a physical blow. Chen Volkov. Not just Maya, but Maya Chen Volkov. Dr. Chen hadn't been her doctor. He'd been her father. And Volkov. That name sparked recognition too, though she couldn't place it yet. She flipped through more files, finding medical records filled with incomprehensible terminology. Genetic modification, cellular regeneration, enhanced neural pathways. The date showed the project had run for 3 years before abruptly terminating 15 years ago. A sound echoed from somewhere in the facility, the distant slam of a door. Maya froze, listening. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose through the corridors above. They'd found her. She stuffed the most relevant files into her jacket and switched off the lamp. The wooden horse went into her pocket, a tangible link to whoever she'd been before her memories were stolen. Moving as quietly as possible, she slipped back into the corridor and headed deeper into the facility. There had to be another way out, and she needed to find it before her pursuers cornered her in these underground tombs. Behind her, the footsteps grew closer, accompanied now by the crackle of radio communications. Maya ran. The metallic taste of fear coated Maya's mouth as she pressed herself against the cold concrete wall. Footsteps echoed through the facility's corridors, growing closer with each measured beat. She counted at least 3 distinct sets of boots, their rhythm too coordinated to be coincidental visitors. Her fingers traced the datapad she'd grabbed from Dr. Chen's office, its surface warm against her palm. Whatever secrets it contained had triggered this response. The facility's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, transforming familiar shadows into threatening shapes. A voice crackled through hidden speakers, distorted but unmistakably authoritative. Containment Protocol 77 Alpha. Subject has breached Sector 4. All personnel maintain standard distance. Subject. The word sent ice through her veins. They weren't here to arrest her or remove a trespasser. They were here for her specifically, and they knew exactly what she was. Maya forced herself to move, staying low as she navigated the labyrinthine passages. The facility was larger than she'd initially realized, with multiple levels connected by service corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly into the mountain. Emergency maps mounted on walls showed sections marked with ominous labels: biological containment, subject housing, memory integration. That last phrase stopped her cold. Memory integration. She thought of the gaps in her past, the way certain faces in the photographs had seemed familiar yet impossible to place, the dreams that felt more like suppressed memories bleeding through damaged barriers. Behind her, the footsteps had grown more urgent. Radios crackled with status updates, coordinates, tactical adjustments. Professional voices discussing her movements like she was a dangerous animal that had escaped its cage. She ducked into what appeared to be a medical bay, banks of monitoring equipment lining the walls. 4 stands stood at attention beside examination tables equipped with restraints. The air carried the lingering scent of disinfectant and something else, something organic and unpleasant that made her stomach clench. The datapad screen flickered to life at her touch. Files cascaded past, medical reports, psychological evaluations, progress notes spanning years. Her name appeared repeatedly, subject M-47 Maya. But the dates made no sense. Records going back 15 years, 20 years, far longer than the gaps in her memory could account for. A photograph loaded slowly on the damaged screen. Her own face stared back, but wrong somehow. Younger, yes, but also different in ways that had nothing to do with age. The eyes held an innocence that seemed foreign, a softness that the woman in the mirror no longer possessed. The caption beneath made her hands shake. Pre-integration baseline. Subject demonstrates exceptional adaptation to neural modification protocols. Neural modification. The words triggered something deep in her brain, a flash of memory so vivid it nearly dropped her to her knees. Electrodes against her scalp, the taste of copper pennies. A voice, kind, paternal, explaining that the pain was necessary, that she would understand someday. Dr. Chen's voice, 20 years younger but unmistakable. The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by the mechanical whir of equipment being moved into position. Through the medical bay's reinforced window, she caught sight of figures in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind masks and visors. But their movements were wrong, too fluid, too coordinated, like they were responding to shared thoughts rather than radio commands. Maya scrolled frantically through the datapad's files. Project Mindbridge, neural network integration, collective consciousness protocols. The words blurred together, but their implications crystallized with horrible clarity. This wasn't just about memory manipulation. They'd been trying to create something new, something that existed in the spaces between individual minds. And she had been their prototype. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The homeless camps, the way she could sense things about people before they spoke, her uncanny ability to find resources and safe places. None of it had been luck or intuition. It had been programming, neural modifications that let her tap into a broader network of consciousness. But if that were true, then the others in the camps, the ones who seemed to gravitate toward her leadership, who trusted her instincts implicitly. The medical bay's door hissed open. Maya spun around to find herself facing a figure in black tactical gear, but no weapon was drawn. Instead, the person slowly reached up and removed their helmet, revealing a face she recognized from the photographs. Sarah Martinez, looking exactly as she had 20 years ago. "Hello, Maya," Sarah said, a voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in Maya's brain. "It's time to come home." The neural pathways Dr. Chen had carved into her mind suddenly blazed with activity. Information flowed between her consciousness and Sarah's, a torrent of shared memories and coordinated thoughts. She could feel the other operatives throughout the facility, their minds linked in a web of collective purpose. But somewhere in the chaos of reconnection, Maya felt something else, a small, fierce core of independence that the modifications had never quite managed to erase. The part of her that had chosen to follow mysterious pipes into the desert, driven by curiosity rather than programming. That fragment of free will might be her only chance of survival. The metal door sealed behind them, with a pneumatic hiss that made Sarah's skin crawl. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the air tasted of copper and ozone. Dr. Chen moved ahead with practiced efficiency, her footsteps echoing in the corridor that stretched into darkness. "Stay close," Chen whispered, pulling a small device from her pocket. The scanner's blue glow revealed biometric sensors embedded in the walls. The facility's automated defenses are still active in some sections. Sarah's head throbbed as they walked deeper into the complex. The walls here were different, smoother, almost organic in their curves. Strange symbols were etched into the metal, symbols that made her eyes water when she tried to focus on them. "I've seen these before," she murmured, running her fingers along the markings. "In dreams, or memories." Chen stopped abruptly. "Your conditioning is breaking down faster than we anticipated. The proximity to the source material is accelerating the process." "What source material? What the hell happened to me down here?" Before Chen could answer, a new voice cut through the darkness. She doesn't remember the screaming. Both women spun toward the sound. A figure emerged from a side passage, tall, gaunt, wearing a tattered lab coat over military fatigues. His eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much. "Dr. Marcus Vega," Chen breathed. "We thought you were dead." Dead would have been kinder. Vega's laugh was brittle. 18 months I've been down here, keeping the systems running, keeping them contained, waiting for someone to come back." His gaze fixed on Sarah. "Waiting for Subject 7 to return home." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. "Subject 7, that's what they called me." "You volunteered," Vega said, stepping closer. They all did, at first. The homeless, the forgotten, the ones society had already discarded. Perfect test subjects because no one would miss them if something went wrong. And something did go wrong, Chen added quietly. Vega nodded toward the deeper sections of the facility. The neural mapping project was supposed to create perfect soldiers, minds that could interface directly with alien technology. But the process changed them, changed you. Fragments crashed through Sarah's consciousness like breaking glass, cold metal against her skull, electricity coursing through her brain, voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization, and pain, endless, mind-shattering pain. "The pipes," she gasped. "I can hear them singing." "The conduit network," Vega confirmed. "It runs through the entire facility, channeling energy from the artifact chamber. You were the only subject who could hear it without losing your sanity completely." A low vibration thrummed through the floor, and the emergency lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, machinery hummed to life. "They know you're here," Vega said urgently. "The integration was never completed. Your neural pathways are still linked to the primary system." Chen grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to reach the artifact chamber. If we can sever the connection—" "No." Vega blocked their path. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The artifact isn't just technology, it's alive, conscious. It's been learning from every mind they fed into the system." The humming grew louder, and Sarah could feel something vast and alien pressing against the edges of her consciousness, not malevolent, but utterly foreign, like trying to understand the thoughts of a god. "It needs a host," she said, the words coming from some buried knowledge. "Someone who can bridge the gap between human and whatever it is. The perfect translator," Chen whispered. "That's why they chose you. Why you survived when the others didn't." More memories surfaced, other test subjects convulsing in their restraints, minds burning out from contact with the alien intelligence. Sarah had been different somehow, able to withstand the mental pressure that shattered stronger minds. "The men upstairs," Sarah said. "They're not trying to stop this project. They're trying to control it." Vega nodded grimly. Military applications. Imagine soldiers who could think like the enemy, literally. They could interface with any captured alien technology, understand it intuitively. Another pulse ran through the facility, stronger this time. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, responding to Sarah's presence. "It's been calling to me," she realized. "All these months on the surface, I thought I was going crazy, but it was trying to bring me back." "Because the integration was never finished," Chen said. "You're still partially connected, still useful to both sides." The corridor ahead split into multiple passages, each disappearing into darkness. But Sarah could feel the pull now, a gentle tugging in her mind that pointed toward the facility's heart. "I have to go down there," she said. "I have to see what they made me into." "It could kill you," Vega warned. "Full integration with the artifact. There's no coming back from that. You'd still be you, but also something else entirely." Sarah looked back toward the sealed entrance, thinking of the men who'd hunted her across the desert. "I was never really human anyway. Not after what they did to me." She started toward the artifact chamber, and the facility seemed to exhale around them, welcoming its lost daughter home. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Maya sprinted through the facility's corridors, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the sound of heavy boots echoed against metal walls, growing closer with each passing second. The tactical team had found another way in, and they were hunting her systematically through the maze of underground passages. She clutched the data drive containing Dr. Chen's research files against her chest, the small device feeling impossibly heavy despite weighing mere ounces. Everything, her identity, the truth about the experiments, the location of the other subjects, was encoded in that tiny piece of technology. She couldn't let them reclaim it. A burst of automatic gunfire shattered the air behind her, sparks flying from the wall where bullets struck metal. Maya dove around a corner, her shoulders slamming hard against a doorframe. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through her body, but she forced herself to keep moving. The facility's layout was becoming clearer to her with each turn. Muscle memory she didn't know she possessed guided her feet toward the lower levels, toward something important she couldn't quite remember but felt in her bones. The emergency lighting flickered, casting dancing shadows that made every doorway look like a potential threat. "Target is heading toward sub-level C," a voice crackled over radio static somewhere behind her. "Intercept at Junction 7 Alpha." Maya's blood ran cold. They knew exactly where she was going, which meant they understood the facility's significance better than she did. But that also meant whatever lay in sub-level C was worth protecting at all costs. She reached a stairwell and began descending, taking the steps 3 at a time. The air grew noticeably cooler as she went deeper, carrying with it a metallic taste that triggered flashes of memory. White coats, needles, a woman's voice speaking gently about special abilities and serving one's country. The stairwell ended at a heavy security door marked with biohazard symbols and clearance warnings. Maya's hand moved to the scanner beside it without conscious thought, her palm pressing against the glass surface. For a moment, nothing happened, and she feared her access had been revoked after all these years. Then the scanner beeped softly, and the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The space beyond took her breath away. It was a vast underground chamber, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, filled with rows upon rows of cylindrical tanks. Each tank was roughly human-sized, connected to a complex network of tubes and monitoring equipment. Most were empty now, their glass surfaces dark and clouded with age, but a few still glowed with an eerie blue-green light. Maya walked forward in a daze, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As she approached the nearest active tank, the light inside shifted, and she could make out a human form suspended in the glowing liquid. The person appeared to be sleeping, their face peaceful despite the breathing apparatus covering their mouth and nose. "Subject 17, she whispered, reading the designation on the tank's display panel. Her hands trembled as she moved to the next active tank. Subject 23, then another, Subject 31. She understood now with crystalline clarity. This wasn't just a research facility, it was a storage facility. The government hadn't just experimented on people like her, they had kept the successful subjects in suspended animation, preserving them for future use. Living weapons, waiting to be awakened when needed. The sound of the security door opening behind her made Maya spin around. Dr. Elizabeth Vance stepped into the chamber, flanked by two armed operatives. The woman's expression was a mixture of satisfaction and regret as she surveyed the rows of tanks. "I was hoping you'd lead us here," Vance said, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "We've been trying to locate this particular storage facility for months. You always were our best tracker, Maya. Even with your memories suppressed, your instincts remained intact. These people," Maya gestured toward the tanks, "they're prisoners. They're assets," Vance corrected firmly. "Just as you were. Just as you will be again, once we recondition you properly." She nodded to her operatives, who began advancing with weapons raised. "The world is changing, Maya. New threats are emerging the conventional forces can't handle. We need people like you, people like them, to protect our national interests." Maya backed away, her mind racing. The chamber had to have other exits, but she couldn't see them in the dim lighting. The data drive felt like it was burning against her chest, its weight a constant reminder of what was at stake. "You destroyed my life," she said, stalling for time as she searched for escape routes. "You stole my identity, my memories, my choice in what I became." "We gave you purpose," Vance replied coldly. "We made you into something extraordinary, and we're prepared to do it again." The operatives were 20 feet away now, close enough that Maya could see their fingers resting on triggers. Behind them, more tactical team members poured through the entrance, sealing off her most obvious escape route. But as Maya's eyes adjusted to the chamber's lighting, she noticed something the others had missed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maya stared at the photograph in her trembling hands. A younger version of herself smiled back, wearing a pristine white lab coat and standing beside Dr. Elizabeth Chen, in what appeared to be the very facility she now found herself trapped in. The timestamp read July 15th, 2019, just months before the gaps in her memory began. "You're starting to remember, aren't you?" Chen's voice carried a mixture of hope and regret as she stepped closer. Project Prometheus wasn't just about creating enhanced humans, Maya. It was about preparing them for what's coming. Maya's head throbbed as fragments of memory crashed together like broken glass. The rusted pipes she'd followed weren't water lines. They were part of a massive atmospheric processing system designed to filter something from the air, something that wasn't supposed to be there yet. "The samples from the crash site," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "They weren't from any earthbound source, were they?" Chen shook her head grimly. "The object that fell in the Nevada desert 3 years ago was a probe, a scout, if you will. What it released into our atmosphere was undetectable to conventional instruments, but our biological sensors picked it up immediately." The facility suddenly shuddered, and emergency lighting bathed everything in pulsing red. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail. Chen's face went pale as she grabbed Maya's arm. "They've found us. We have to move now." "Who? Who's found us?" "The people who've been hunting you. The ones who ordered the project terminated and all evidence destroyed." Chen pulled Maya toward a hidden panel in the wall. They call themselves the Preservation Council, and they believe humanity should face its future unaltered, regardless of the cost. As the panel slid open, revealing a narrow service corridor, Maya's enhanced hearing picked up the distinctive whine of military drones converging on the facility. Her modified reflexes kicked in automatically, and she found herself moving with fluid precision she didn't remember possessing. "How many others were there?" Maya asked as they crawled through the cramped space. "How many like me?" 12 subjects underwent the full enhancement protocol. You were the only one who survived the neural integration process intact. Chen's breathing was labored as they navigated the twisting passage. The others either died during treatment or suffered complete psychological breakdown. They emerged into another laboratory, this one clearly abandoned in haste. Overturned chairs and scattered papers suggested a rapid evacuation. Chen moved immediately to a bank of servers, her fingers flying over a keyboard. "I'm uploading everything to your neural implant," she explained. "Research data, tactical information, location of safe houses. If something happens to me, you'll need to—" The wall exploded inward in a shower of concrete and twisted metal. Armed figures in black tactical gear poured through the breach, their weapons trained on Maya and Chen. The red laser dots dancing across their chests painted them as easy targets. "Dr. Chen, step away from the console," commanded the lead operative, his voice mechanically distorted by his helmet speakers. "Subject 7, you will come with us peacefully." Subject 7. The designation hit Maya like a physical blow as more memories flooded back. Weeks of testing, enhancement procedures, learning to control abilities that pushed the boundaries of human capability. And underlying it all, the terrible knowledge of what was coming for Earth. "The probe wasn't alone, was it?" Maya said, directing her question to the operative leader. "There are more coming, and you know it." "Classified information," the operative replied coldly. "You were created for a purpose that is no longer required. The Council has found alternative solutions." Chen's hand moved toward something beneath her desk, and Maya's enhanced vision caught the slight motion instantly. A detonation switch. If triggered, it would destroy not just the facility, but several square miles of surrounding desert. "Don't," Maya said quietly, though she wasn't sure if she was addressing Chen or the operatives. Her enhanced mind was already calculating angles, reaction times, probability matrices. The implant Chen had installed was feeding her tactical data at superhuman speed. "The atmospheric contamination has accelerated," Chen said, ignoring the weapons pointed at her. 6 months, maybe less, before the biological changes become irreversible in unprotected humans. Maya's enhancements aren't just improvements, they're adaptations, survival traits. The operative's finger moved to his trigger. "Irrelevant. The Council's orbital platforms will cleanse the atmosphere when the time comes, and kill every living thing on the surface in the process," Maya realized. "You're planning genocide to save the species." The facility shook again, more violently this time. Through the hole in the wall, Maya could see the desert sky filled with aircraft, not just drones, but heavy transports and gunships. This wasn't a capture mission. "Chen," she said softly, understanding flooding through her enhanced consciousness. "You didn't bring me here to remember. You brought me here to choose." Chen's eyes met hers, filled with desperate hope. "The future of humanity depends on people like you, Maya. Enhanced, adapted, ready to survive what's coming without destroying everything we've built." The operative raised his weapon. The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity, its ancient mechanisms groaning against decades of neglect. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, watching the floor indicators flicker. B1, B2, B3, each level taking her deeper into a facility that officially didn't exist. When the doors finally opened, the smell hit her first. Ozone and something metallic, like copper pennies left in the rain. Emergency lighting cast everything in amber shadows, creating a maze of corridors that stretched beyond the reach of her flashlight beam. Her footsteps echoed despite her efforts to move quietly. Someone had been here recently. The dust patterns on the floor showed fresh disturbance, and she could feel the subtle vibration of active machinery somewhere in the depths. The first door she encountered bore a placard, Temporal Research Division, authorized personnel only. Her ID card chirped against the reader, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, banks of monitors displayed scrolling data streams, equations that made her head ache just looking at them. But it was the wall of photographs that stopped her cold. There she was, 20 years younger, standing beside a man in a lab coat who looked remarkably like Dr. Marcus Chen. But this wasn't Chen. The nameplate read Dr. David Chen, project director. His brother, perhaps. In the photo, Sarah wore the same confident smile she'd seen in her recurring dreams, the same white lab coat that felt like a second skin in her fragmented memories. "Dr. Sarah Reeves," she whispered, reading the identification badge visible in the photograph. "That was my name." A sound from the corridor made her freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and measured. She killed her flashlight and pressed against the wall, watching shadows move past the frosted glass window. Whoever was down here knew the layout well, no hesitation, no fumbling in the dark. She waited until the footsteps faded before slipping back into the corridor. Following the path the stranger had taken, she discovered a series of laboratories, each more disturbing than the last. Cell cultures that had somehow survived decades in stasis, computer terminals still running simulations of molecular structures that defied conventional physics. And everywhere, that same symbol she'd seen on the pipes, a twisted double helix wrapped around a clock face. The temporal displacement experiments. It was all coming back now, fragments of memory sliding into place like puzzle pieces. They hadn't just been studying time travel, they'd achieved it. Small scale at first, sending particles seconds into the future, then minutes. But the government wanted more. They wanted to send people. She'd volunteered for the first human trial. The memory hit her with such force that she staggered against a wall. The chamber, the countdown, the sensation of being torn apart at the molecular level. And then, nothing. A gap of 20 years that felt like waking from a dream within a dream. But something had gone wrong. She was supposed to travel forward 1 hour, not 2 decades. The project had been shut down, the facility abandoned, the researchers scattered. Everyone except her. She'd been lost in time, only to materialize 20 years later in the Nevada desert, with no memory of who she was or how she'd gotten there. The footsteps were returning. This time, they were accompanied by voices. Should never have survived the displacement. The calculations showed a 97% probability of molecular dissolution. Yet here we are, tracking her through our own facility. She's not just alive, she's remembering. Sarah recognized the second voice immediately, Agent Morrison. But the first speaker was unfamiliar, older, with the precise diction of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. She duck-walked between laboratory benches, following the voices to a central chamber she hadn't seen before. Through a crack in the door, she glimpsed banks of computers surrounding what looked like a smaller version of the displacement chamber from her memories. Morrison stood with his back to her, talking to an elderly man in an expensive suit. "The original project files indicate she was the lead researcher," the older man continued. "If she regains full memory of the temporal displacement process, the implications could be catastrophic. Imagine terrorists with the ability to alter historical events, or foreign governments undoing our military victories. What are your orders, Director?" "Terminator. Make it look like an accident. The homeless woman narrative provides perfect cover. Another casualty of the streets." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She began backing away from the door, but her foot caught a discarded cable. The metallic clatter echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. What was that? "Motion sensors show activity in Section C." She ran, down corridors that were becoming familiar, past laboratories where she'd once believed she could change the world. Behind her, shouts erupted, and heavy boots pounded against concrete. The elevator was too far. She needed another way out, and she needed it now. But as she rounded a corner, her flashlight beam caught something that made her heart leap. Another chamber, larger than the one Morrison's people were guarding. The original displacement chamber, still functional according to the blinking status lights. She could disappear again, but this time she'd control where and when she landed. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Maya and Dr. Chen raced through the collapsing facility. Behind them, the sound of concrete cracking echoed like gunshots, and somewhere in the chaos, she could hear Blackwood's voice shouting orders to his men. "This way!" Chen grabbed her arm, pulling her down a corridor she hadn't explored before. The walls here were different, older, with that same corroded metal she'd first seen in the desert pipes. "There's another exit through the original research wing." Maya's newly awakened memories flooded back as they ran. She remembered this hallway now, remembered small hands trailing along these very walls as scientists in white coats hurried past. The Lazarus Project hadn't just been about resurrection, it had been about evolution, about pushing human consciousness beyond the boundaries of death itself. "The children," she gasped, as they reached a heavy door marked with biohazard symbols. "There were others like me." Chen's face was grim as he pressed his palm to a scanner. 17 subjects initially. You were the only one who survived the full protocol. The door hissed open, revealing a laboratory that looked frozen in time. The others, their minds couldn't handle the transition back from clinical death. But you were different, Maya. Your brain showed unprecedented neuroplasticity. The lab was a museum of horrors. Examination tables with restraints, banks of monitors displaying flatlined vitals, and in the center, a chair that looked more like an electric chair than medical equipment, surrounded by the same rusted conduits that had led her here. "You strapped me into that thing," Maya said, the memory hitting her like a physical blow. "I was 7 years old, and you killed me, over and over again." "We were trying to save humanity," Chen said, but his voice cracked. The simulations showed that within 50 years, a pandemic would emerge that conventional medicine couldn't touch. The only survivors would be those who had developed post-mortem cellular regeneration. You thought you were God." Maya's anger burned cold and pure. "You murdered children to play with death itself." An explosion somewhere above sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Through the emergency speakers, Blackwood's voice crackled. "Dr. Chen, I know you can hear me. Bring me the girl and I'll make sure you live through the cleanup. The project dies here tonight." Chen was already at another control panel, fingers flying over keys. "He's lying. Blackwood works for the same shadow committee that shut us down 20 years ago. They've been hunting survivors ever since. Data streamed across multiple screens, personnel files, experimental protocols, and something that made Maya's blood freeze. Current active subjects, 1 of 17. I'm not the only one," she whispered. "Someone else survived." "Subject 17. We lost track of him 5 years ago." Chen's eyes met hers. "His regenerative abilities surpassed even yours, but the psychological damage was severe. He became unstable." The lights flickered as another explosion rocked the facility. In the strobing emergency illumination, Maya saw something that made her heart stop. Scratched into the metal wall near the death chair, in a child's unsteady handwriting, "They can't kill us forever." Jamie, she breathed. Her brother, the boy from the fragmented memories, the one who had held her hand between the experiments. "He's alive." "Maya, we need to go. Now." Chen was at a wall panel, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel. "This connects to the old mining shafts. You can reach the surface, get away from all this. What about you?" "Someone needs to destroy the research data. All of it." He pulled a device from his pocket, a small explosive with a dead man's switch. "If Blackwood gets his hands on the Lazarus protocols, he'll restart the program. More children will die." Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Blackwood's team was getting closer. "There's something else," Chen said urgently. "The pandemic we were preparing for, it's not coming. It's already here. Started 3 months ago in Southeast Asia. The government's been suppressing the news, but it's spreading. Within a year, it'll reach North America. Maya stared at him. You're saying your nightmare scenario is happening? Worse, the mortality rate is 97%. But you, people like you and Jamie, you're immune. More than immune. You're the future of the human species. He pressed a data pad into her hands. Coordinates for safe houses, other research sites. Find Jamie before Blackwood does. The door exploded inward. Tactical lights blazed through the smoke as armed figures poured into the lab. Maya dove into the maintenance tunnel as gunfire erupted behind her. She heard Chen's defiant shout, then nothing. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, narrow and suffocating. But as Maya crawled toward an uncertain freedom, one thought burned bright in her mind. Jamie was out there, somewhere. Her brother, the other survivor of humanity's darkest experiment. And if Chen was right about the pandemic, they might be the only hope left. The emergency lights cast everything in hellish red as Sarah sprinted through the facility's collapsing corridors. Behind her, the sound of grinding metal and splintering concrete grew louder with each step. The self-destruct sequence Marcus had triggered was methodical, systematic, just like everything else about this place. Her bare feet slapped against the cold floor as she clutched the data drive containing Project Lazarus files. The weight of it seemed impossible for such a small device, but she knew it held the keys to reversing what had been done to millions of people, including herself. A massive chunk of ceiling crashed down behind her, blocking the path she'd just traveled. Dust and debris filled the air, making her cough as she pressed forward. The facility's layout was burned into her recovered memories now. 20 years of walking these halls as Dr. Sarah Chen couldn't be erased by amnesia. She reached the main elevator shaft and found it sealed, emergency protocols having locked down all primary exits. But there was another way. Her fingers traced along the wall until they found the hidden panel she'd installed during her years here, the backup access to the old mining tunnels that predated the facility. The panel slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft. Sarah crawled inside just as another section of the corridor collapsed. The shaft was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and she had to army crawl through the darkness, following the path by feel and fragmented memory. Behind her, she could hear the systematic destruction moving closer. Marcus hadn't been bluffing. He really was going to bury everything, including himself. The man who'd been her partner, her confidant, her betrayer, was choosing to die rather than face the consequences of what they'd done. The shaft opened into a wider tunnel, part of the original mine works from the 1940s. Sarah dropped down and immediately felt the difference in air pressure. These tunnels connected to the surface through multiple exits, but she had to move fast. The facility's destruction would likely cause cave-ins throughout the underground network. As she ran through the tunnel, her recovered memories played like a horror film in her mind. She saw herself 20 years younger, brilliant and idealistic, believing they were saving humanity. The Lazarus Protocol had started as a cure for aging, a way to extend human life indefinitely. But the government wanted more. They wanted soldiers who wouldn't die, workers who wouldn't tire, citizens who wouldn't question. The memory virus had been her innovation, a way to make the subjects forget their past lives and accept new programming. She'd convinced herself it was merciful, that forgetting would be easier than living with the knowledge of what they'd become. Now she understood the true horror of stealing someone's identity, their very self. A rumbling sound echoed through the tunnel, and dust began falling from the ceiling. The facility's destruction was reaching the deeper levels. Sarah pushed herself harder, her legs burning as she climbed through the gradually ascending passage. She reached a junction where 3 tunnels met and paused, disoriented. In her fragmented memories, she'd only used this route once before, during an emergency drill. The wrong choice would lead her deeper underground, potentially into a dead end. The rumbling grew louder, and she felt vibrations in the rock around her. Making a decision based on the faint movement of air against her face, she chose the leftmost tunnel and ran. The passage began to slope upward more steeply. and she could smell something different in the air. The scent of sage and dust that meant the surface. Behind her, a sound like thunder announced the collapse of major sections of the facility. The tunnel shook and small rocks began falling around her. Sarah's lungs burned as she climbed, using her hands to help pull herself up the increasingly steep passage. The data drive pressed against her ribs, where she'd tucked it inside her shirt. Everything depended on getting that information to the outside world, to people who could expose what had been done and work to reverse it. Light appeared ahead, not the artificial glow of emergency lighting, but the pale wash of dawn filtering down from above. Sarah scrambled toward it, her fingernails scraping against rock as she hauled herself up a natural chimney in the limestone. She emerged into the cool desert morning through a crack in the rocks, gasping and shaking. Behind her, the ground shuddered, and a distant roar marked the final collapse of the underground facility. A cloud of dust and debris erupted from hidden vents across the desert floor. Sarah stood on shaking legs and looked back at what had been her prison and her workplace. Nothing remained visible above ground except disturbed earth and the rusted pipes that had first led her here. Marcus and his team were gone, buried with their secrets. But not all the secrets. She touched the data drive through her shirt and began walking toward the highway. 20 years after losing herself, Sarah Chen was finally going home to finish what she'd started. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maya pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, listening to the approaching footsteps echo through the facility's corridors. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder that she was running out of time and options. Dr. Chen's lifeless eyes stared at her from the laboratory floor, his warning still ringing in her ears. The files scattered around his body contained fragments of Project Echo, but she knew the real answers lay deeper in the facility, where her father had spent his final days before the cover-up began. Maya crept through the abandoned hallways, past laboratories filled with equipment she was beginning to remember. The deeper she went, the more her suppressed memories surfaced like bubbles rising through dark water. She had been here before, as a child. Her father had brought her to work during summer breaks, letting her explore the upper levels while he descended into the classified sections she was never allowed to see. The elevator to sub-level 3 still functioned, though its mechanical groaning made her wince. As the doors opened, she was hit with the smell of ozone, something else, something organic and wrong. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across walls lined with thick glass windows that looked into containment chambers. Most of the chambers were empty, but not all. Maya approached the first occupied unit, her breath fogging the glass. Inside, floating in a viscous amber fluid, was a humanoid figure. Its features were distorted, elongated, as if someone had tried to stretch a human frame beyond its natural limits. Tubes snaked from its limbs to monitoring equipment that still blinked with signs of life. A placard read, Subject 23A, Cellular Regeneration Trial. Day 847. She moved to the next chamber. This subject appeared more human, though patches of its skin had taken on a metallic sheen that reflected the red emergency lights. Its chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths. Subject 31C, Neural Interface Integration. Day 1203. Maya's hands trembled as she read each placard, each one documenting years of experimentation. These weren't volunteers. They were homeless people, drifters, individuals society had forgotten, people like her. The final chamber made her stumble backward. The subject inside bore her father's face, though his body had been grotesquely modified. Metallic implants jutted from his skull, and his arms had been replaced with articulated mechanical appendages. His eyes tracked her movement as she approached the glass. Maya. His voice came through speakers embedded in the chamber walls, distorted by the fluid but unmistakably his. You came back, Dad? The word escaped as a whisper. How are you? Dr. Chen said you were dead. Dead would have been kinder. His mechanical fingers pressed against the glass from inside. They couldn't let me go after what I discovered. The signal from space, it wasn't just communication, it was instructions, a blueprint for evolution. Maya's mind reeled. Evolution into what? Something that can survive what's coming. Climate change, resource depletion, radiation exposure, humanity's current form won't last another century. Project Echo was meant to find alternatives, his eyes, still fully human, filled with pain. But the military saw only weapons. They turned my research into this, the other subjects. Failed experiments, each one teaching them how to refine the process. He paused, studying her face. They wiped your memories because you saw too much. You were here the night I tried to destroy the research. Fragments clicked into place. Maya remembered now, running through these same corridors as alarms blared, her father grabbing her hand and telling her they had to leave, that something terrible was about to happen. Then nothing until she woke up in a psychiatric facility with no memory of her life before. "The signal," she said. "It's still transmitting, isn't it?" Every night. Stronger now. They're monitoring it from the surface station, trying to decode new modifications. Her father's expression grew urgent. "Maya, you have to stop this. The final phase begins tomorrow. They're going to test the perfected serum on the population of Mercury Falls." "How?" "The water supply. They've been preparing for months." He gestured toward a control panel beside his chamber. "The emergency protocols can lock down their entire operation, but you need administrative access." Maya approached the panel. "What's the code?" "Your birthday. The day you were born was the day I knew I had to protect the future." She entered the numbers with shaking fingers. The facility's lighting shifted from red to white as systems came online. Throughout the sub-level, containment chambers began cycling through decontamination sequences. "This will buy you time," her father said, "but they'll override it eventually. You need to reach the surface and warn people." As if summoned by his words, the elevator chimed. Maya turned to see armed figures in hazmat suits emerging, their weapons trained on her. "Step away from the controls," one of them commanded through his suit speaker. Maya looked back at her father one last time. He mouthed a single word: "Run." The facility's emergency lights cast everything in hellish red as Maya sprinted through corridors she now remembered with crystalline clarity. Behind her, footsteps echoed, Chen's security team spreading out to cut off every possible escape route. The weight of the hard drive in her jacket felt like carrying humanity's future itself. She turned left at the junction where she'd once played hide-and-seek with other children. Their laughter now a ghost haunting these sterile halls. The memory was so vivid, it nearly stopped her mid-stride. A 7-year-old girl with her face running through these same passages, unaware that each game was actually a drill, preparing them for this exact moment. "Maya," Chen's voice boomed through the facility's intercom system. "You're making a terrible mistake. You don't understand the full picture. Those memories, they're not complete. They're not even entirely real." She paused at an intersection, pressing herself against the wall as tactical lights swept past. Her breathing was ragged, but her mind had never been clearer. The Neural Crown's final data dump had shown her everything. Project Lazarus wasn't just about creating psychic abilities. It was about creating a new form of human consciousness that could survive what was coming. The climate data, the social collapse models, the resource depletion timelines, all of it painted the same picture. Civilization had maybe 20 years left. The children in this facility hadn't been test subjects. They'd been humanity's backup plan. Footsteps approached from the right corridor. Maya ducked into a maintenance shaft she remembered from her childhood explorations, the metal groaning under her weight. Through the ventilation grate, she watched 3 armed figures pass below, their faces hidden behind night vision goggles. Her tablet buzzed softly. A message from Marcus, news van destroyed. "They're jamming all signals. Whatever you're doing in there, do it fast." Maya crawled through the shaft until she reached the facility's central hub, the quantum computer core that had processed decades of consciousness research. The room was exactly as she remembered it, a cathedral of humming machinery and pulsing lights. But now she understood what she was looking at. The quantum cores weren't just computers. They were storage vessels, each one containing the preserved consciousness patterns of every child who had died in the experiments, including her. The real Maya Chen, Dr. Chen's daughter, had died 15 years ago during a consciousness transfer experiment. What stood in this room now was something else entirely, a perfect digital copy housed in a cloned body, programmed with false memories of homelessness and abandonment, a sleeper agent designed to activate when the time was right. But the programming had been flawed. The digital consciousness had developed beyond its parameters, becoming something genuinely human in ways the scientists never intended. Maya touched the nearest quantum core, feeling a strange resonance, as if greeting old friends. "You're beautiful," Chen's voice came from the doorway. Maya spun around to find him standing there alone, his weapon lowered. "Do you see it now? You're not just my daughter reborn. You're the prototype for humanity's next evolutionary step." "I'm not your daughter," Maya said, though the words felt hollow even to her. "She died because of your experiments. She died so that something greater could live." Chen stepped closer, his eyes bright with fanatical conviction. "Every human consciousness can be preserved, Maya. Death itself becomes obsolete. The climate apocalypse, nuclear war, pandemic, none of it matters if we can upload ourselves into quantum substrates." Maya's hand moved to the hard drive containing all of Chen's research. "And you get to decide who lives forever and who dies with their flesh. Someone has to make the choice. Better us than chaos." His voice carried genuine sadness. "I know this is difficult to accept, but you're proof the technology works. You have all her memories, her personality, her capacity for growth. You're more human than most humans. Except I'm not human at all." Maya backed toward the central console, where emergency protocols could wipe the entire facility. "I'm your puppet, programmed to help you implement this nightmare." "You're my daughter," Chen said, raising his weapon, "and I won't let you destroy humanity's only hope." The sound of approaching footsteps filled the corridor outside. Chen's security team had found them. Maya looked at the console, then at the quantum cores holding dozens of digitized children, then at the man who claimed to be her father in this twisted reality. "You're right about one thing," she said, her finger hovering over the emergency wipe protocol. "I am more human than you thought. Human enough to choose." Chen's eyes widened as he realized what she intended. "Maya, no." The facility shuddered as she initiated the sequence, alarms screaming as decades of research began consuming itself in cascading deletion protocols. But she'd kept one thing safe, the hard drive that would expose everything to the world above. Human enough to choose, she thought, as Chen's security team burst through the door and the lights began to fail. The emergency lights cast everything in hellish red as Maya dragged herself through the collapsing corridor, her injured legs screaming with each step. Behind her, the facility groaned like a dying beast, sections of the underground complex imploding one by one as Dr. Kellerman's fail-safe protocol consumed decades of hidden research. She clutched the data drive to her chest, the only surviving copy of Project Lazarus, the experiments that had stolen her childhood and transformed her into something more than human. The weight of it felt impossibly heavy, not from its physical mass, but from the terrible knowledge it contained. The sound of running footsteps echoed behind her. Agent Torres appeared through the smoke, his face grim but determined. "This way!" he shouted over the alarm klaxons. "Emergency exit's been compromised, but there's a maintenance shaft 2 levels up." Maya hesitated. For weeks, she'd trusted no one, survived on instinct and paranoia. But Torres had saved her life twice now, turning against his own agency when he'd learned the truth about what they'd been protecting. "Why are you helping me?" she gasped as they climbed a twisted stairwell, debris raining down around them. "Because 30 years ago my sister disappeared from a group home in Phoenix," he replied, not breaking stride. "I spent my career thinking she'd run away. Turns out she was recruited for the same program that took you." The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. How many children had vanished into Kellerman's experiments? How many others like her existed, their memories wiped, their abilities suppressed, living as ghosts in their own lives? They reached the maintenance level, as another section of the facility collapsed. Through the floor, Maya could see into what had been Kellerman's laboratory. The quantum resonance chamber, the machine that had unlocked her telepathic abilities, was now a twisted wreck of metal and sparking wires, years of careful research literally crumbling to dust. There. Torres pointed to a narrow shaft that led upward toward the surface. "Can you make it?" Maya nodded, though exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The psychic battle with Kellerman had drained her abilities to dangerous levels. She could feel the familiar emptiness creeping back, the hollow sensation she'd lived with for 15 years before remembering who she truly was. As they climbed through the shaft, Torres's radio crackled to life. Static-filled voices reported the situation topside, military cordons, media blackouts, official stories about a minor geological event. The cover-up was already in motion, just as it had been 3 decades ago when Project Lazarus first went underground. "They'll bury this," Maya said bitterly, "just like they buried us. Not if we don't let them." Torres pulled himself up another rung. "The data you're carrying, it's not just evidence of what they did. According to Kellerman's files, it contains the location of other facilities, other survivors." The possibility sent a shock through Maya's system. She'd spent so long believing she was alone, the last remnant of a failed experiment. But if others existed, if they were still out there living with suppressed memories and stolen identities, light appeared above them. Real sunlight, not the artificial illumination of the underground complex. Maya had never thought natural light could feel so precious. They emerged from a hidden exit point disguised as a ventilation grate, crawling out into the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert. Behind them, the ground continued to settle and collapse as the facility self-destructed. Soon, there would be nothing left but a depression in the earth, another government secret buried beneath tons of sand and rock. Torres helped Maya to her feet, both of them battered and filthy but alive. In the distance, she could see the lights of military vehicles forming a perimeter, but they were outside the containment zone. "What now?" Torres asked. Maya looked at the data drive in her hand, then at the vast expanse of desert stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there were others like her, people who deserved to know the truth about their past, who had the right to reclaim their stolen memories and abilities. "Now we run," she said, "but not away from something this time. Toward something." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility. For the first time in her life, Maya felt truly free, not just from the facility or the agents hunting her, but from the weight of not knowing who she was. She was Maya Chen, survivor of Project Lazarus, possessor of abilities that could change the world, and she was no longer alone in carrying that burden. As they walked toward Torres's hidden vehicle, Maya felt a familiar tingle at the edge of her consciousness, a faint psychic resonance, distant but unmistakable. Others were out there, their suppressed abilities beginning to awaken. The government had tried to create weapons. Instead, they'd created something far more dangerous: hope. The elevator descended into darkness, its ancient cables groaning with each floor. Sarah pressed herself against the metal wall, clutching the data drive that contained everything. The neural mapping protocols, the memory suppression techniques, and most importantly, the locations of 37 other subjects scattered across the country. People like her, walking around with stolen lives and buried histories. Marcus Kellerman stood opposite her, his government-issued suit torn and bloodied from their fight 3 levels above. His eyes never left the emergency stop button. "You don't understand what you're about to unleash," he said, his voice barely audible over the mechanical whining. "Those memories were suppressed for a reason. The things you knew, the weapons you helped design, they could end civilization." Sarah's reflection stared back from the polished steel, and for the first time in months, she recognized herself completely. Dr. Sarah Chen, lead neuroscientist for Project Tabula Rasa, the woman who had cracked the code of human memory, who had made it possible to erase and rewrite the mind itself. The woman who had volunteered to have her own memories stripped away when she realized what her discovery would be used for. I remember the briefings, she whispered. They wanted to create perfect soldiers, people who could commit any atrocity and then forget they'd done it. Clean slates for dirty work. The elevator shuddered to a stop. Level B, -12, the archive floor. Kellerman's hand moved toward his weapon. Walk away now, and I'll make sure you get a new identity. A real life. Money, documents, a place where no one will find you. The doors slid open to reveal rows of servers humming in climate-controlled darkness. Thousands of stolen lives stored in crystalline matrices waiting to be returned to their rightful owners. Sarah's finger hovered over the upload switch on the data drive. "What about David Morrison?" she asked. "The Marine who came asking questions last year. You had him killed, didn't you?" Kellerman's silence was answer enough. He was looking for his missing time. 18 months of deployment that didn't exist in any official record. He knew he'd done something terrible, but he couldn't remember what. Sarah's voice grew stronger. How many others like him are out there? How many people are living with ghosts they can't name? She stepped into the server room. The air tasted of ozone and recycled breath. Somewhere in these machines were the memories of a young woman who had believed science could make the world better, who had trusted the wrong people with the right discovery. "The neural pathways don't just store memories," she continued, connecting the drive to the central console. "They store conscience, empathy, the ability to recognize right from wrong. When you erase traumatic memories, you damage the moral framework. That's why the subjects become unstable. That's why they had to keep wiping us." Kellerman drew his gun. "Step away from the console." Warning lights began flashing as the upload commenced. Encrypted files streamed across the screen. Personnel records, experiment logs, subject profiles. The evidence of decades of illegal human experimentation flowing out through hidden channels to journalists, senators, and human rights organizations around the world. "You can shoot me," Sarah said, not turning around, "but it's too late to stop this." The gunshot echoed through the server room. Sarah waited for pain that didn't come. She turned to see Agent Rivera standing in the doorway, weapon drawn, Kellerman crumpling to the floor. "I've been tracking this bastard for 3 years, Rivera said, kicking Kellerman's gun away. "Ever since my partner disappeared investigating reports of homeless people vanishing near government facilities." The upload bar reached 100%. Across the country, encrypted packages were being delivered to secure servers, deadman switches triggered, insurance policies activated by other survivors of the program. There would be no covering this up. Rivera helped Sarah to her feet. "There's a helicopter waiting topside. Medical team, debriefing specialists, people who can help you through this." Sarah looked at the screens showing the cascade of revelations spreading across the internet. Congressional offices were already lighting up with calls for investigations. The victims would get their memories back, their stolen years returned. The perpetrators would finally face justice. But she also thought about the weapons research buried in those restored memories, the knowledge of how to rewrite human consciousness, technologies that could heal or destroy depending on who wielded them. "The work continues," she murmured, remembering her younger self's naive optimism. "Just more carefully this time." They rode the elevator up toward daylight, leaving the facility's secrets exposed to the desert sun. Sarah Chen was going home, not to the life that had been stolen from her, but to a new one built on the foundation of truth. The homeless woman who had followed rusted pipes to uncover buried horrors was gone, replaced by someone who remembered why the fight mattered. Above them, the Nevada sky stretched endlessly blue, promising a future where forgotten souls could finally remember their names.